We're here on Inside Black and Gold as the training camp countdown is rapidly getting towards single digits. Next week, we'll be talking about practices in California.
It's already in the single digits, Steve. How many digits do you think are in single?
Today's what? I'm trying to think.
We're recording this on the 16th.
Okay.
First practice is on the 24th. So, yeah. How many fingers do you have, Steve? Is the question. Yeah, I think that's the issue. You only have 7 fingers, so you assume anything. But yeah, no, we're about a week away from the start of practices. Rookies report today as we record this. Yeah, and we're getting into it. I'm looking forward to not sweating as much. It's gonna feel like stepping out of a sauna into that Southern California air. But yeah, I'm excited. We've talked everything to death on this podcast that we just run out of things to say. Like, there really hasn't been much Saints news to speak of, although the Pro Football Network did put out a top 100 list. Right. Only one Saints player is on it.
Boo.
It's Demario Davis, which is not a boo, but
that's not a boo, right?
Yeah. And like, it's funny. These lists are so telling of, like, I think a lot of time it's just like they don't really care in terms of, like, you can't weigh quality against quality that well across the league, but it is a good sense of, like, whether the national media cares about you at all to even consider. Because, like, Brandon Ayuk, is he a top 100 player or is he just relevant right now? And I think the Saints are, from a national perspective, irrelevant. And you look at a guy like Chris Olave, it's like, as someone who's in fantasy leagues that are not in New Orleans, I feel like I'm going to be able to steal Chris Olave in these fantasy drafts because outside of this market, I just feel like everyone's forgotten about the Saints.
No, you're right. The talk is obviously the team not being in the playoffs still and a new offensive coordinator. But other than that, there hasn't been any kind of black and gold. Alvin Kamara leaving camp, mandatory mini camp on the final day, but there really hasn't been any Saints talk.
Alvin Kamara is not in the top 100. Like, what? Come on. Right. Like, I get he's had a couple down seasons. Alvin Kamara is one of the top 100 players in the NFL. Like,
no love for Taysom Hill either, huh?
Yeah, well, that one should be expected because no one really understands what to call him. So he's never going to do well on those lists, right? So, like, that doesn't surprise me. But, like, Alvin Kamara, Eric McCoy, these guys, here's the thing. If the Saints go out and win 12 games next year, nothing will have changed from a talent perspective for those guys, but they'll appear on those lists is my point. That's what I'm getting at. So, like, you're going to see a ton of 49ers players on that list. It's a great roster, but they're getting viewed nationally as being better because they are on a relevant roster. We're going to talk about the wide receiver position, but did you catch that Amon-Ra St. Brown, Equinemius St. Brown podcast clip?
Oh no, I've been watching the receiver series on Netflix.
He's in that, right?
Yeah, he's in that, and just learning more about the family and all. Obviously, Equinemius was mentioned a little bit.
Yeah, so they have a podcast called the St. Brown Podcast, and he was talking about how, like, it's like no one in the Saints locker room believes they're winning a Super Bowl, and Equinemius didn't exactly push back that hard. He was like, that's cap, but that's about it. Like, he didn't, he didn't sound like he believed himself when he said it. And I just think that's just like, in terms of we're going into training camp. And do you think this is going to be a year we see Ian Rappaport out there? Maybe because they're in Southern California. Maybe that's why. But yeah, I don't know. We'll see how much national attention they get. But today, we're not going to be talking about training camp so much. We're going to be talking about position battles or updating the position battles that we talked about prior to OTAs. We got a good look at some of these players. And, some of these opinions have formed. We heard from coaches. We heard from the players themselves. So the difference this time is I'm not going to rank them offense, defense, or by position. I'm going to rank them by, like, a confidence index. So, like, player A, I think, is 70% likely to win that job, right? Or player B, et cetera, et cetera. And so we're going to start at the top of the ones that I think are technically a battle, but the most likely to go one way or the other. And we're going to work our way through. I have 12 of them. We're going to do 4 per segment. And we'll break it down. The first two we could go through quickly. And now I've made my opinions clear on the specialist conversation. Every year we're going to talk about, okay, is there a kicker battle? Is there a punter battle? I don't think there is really one this year. One thing that's worth noting is with the new roster rules in terms of you don't have to cut down from 90 to 80 or anything like that. You just go from 90 to 53 on the final day. What that allows is every year you could feasibly have a kicker battle. Like last year, I don't know if Blake Grupe wins that job if you have to make cuts early in camp. Because if you recall, those early cuts, you would almost always see the kicker and punter, like the camp legs, in that first round of cuts. Now that you don't have to do that, you actually can have a sustained kicker battle and go all the way through the preseason games and give guys opportunities and see how they handle them. So in that sense, I think you will see Charlie Smith and Matt Hayball get opportunities to show that, hey, I can be a punter in the NFL. But I think at the end of the day, based on what we've heard and what we've seen, Blake Grupe and Lou Hedley are pretty concrete in that. And I have Lou Hedley at about 90% confidence that he's going to win that job. Blake Grupe at about 85% confidence. And keep in mind, you can also stash Charlie Smith on the practice squad in that international spot and not even use a roster spot. So that's kind of where I land on those two.
Yeah, I agree totally with you here that those are pretty locked down. Obviously, things could change in season for next season if things don't go right. But I think going into this year, yeah, your kicking specialists are pretty much locked in stone there.
Yeah, and I mean, like, you're talking about two guys who are coming off of their rookie seasons,
right,
going into their second season. So if you were going to say, hey, well, Blake wasn't as good as I wanted him to be last year, the response to that from the coaching staff will be, yeah, that was his rookie season. Like, he should get better. We expect him to get better. That's the idea. And that's the risk you run when you go with a rookie, is they're going to be inconsistent. You're not going to look at someone and say, yeah, he had some struggles in his rookie season. He wasn't as consistent as we want him to be. So our reaction to that is we're going to go with a
get rid of him
who's even more untested in his rookie season, who's literally never kicked in front of fans before. Like, he's been kicking the wrong shaped football his entire career. Now he's kicking the oblong pigskin football. And
he's got a really cool accent.
He does. And I expect him to stick around, right? I think this is kind of a redshirt year for Charlie. And you go from there. With the punter, I think it's just, hey, you're gonna figure it out. But yeah, I mean, those two specialists, like, I have them on here on this list because the way the roster is now, there's no reason not to have kicker competitions every year, right? Like, if you can have two guys on the roster the entire way through, why not? And hey, maybe you strike gold. And Charlie, like, that's why I have it at a 90% instead of 100% or an 85%, is like, what if he goes out there in the preseason and he's just bombing everything? It all looks perfect. And just like, oh, I mean, we got to go with this guy. But I think it would probably require Blake to stumble pretty mightily in the preseason in terms of like shanking kicks and what we've seen from the last 2 years of Blake is that doesn't happen. Like, he's rock steady in these preseason practices. Like, you saw it last year. We've seen it so far. You know, it wasn't until he hit kind of mid-season slump that everyone started freaking out. Like, he was the NFC Special Teams Player of the Week after Week 5 against the Patriots. Remember? Like, he hit those 250-plus yarders outdoors, and then it kind of fell off a cliff for the next couple weeks. Yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of folks forget about the good with Grupe, and they just remember a lot of the shorter missed kicks and a little bit of the rookie inconsistency.
Those two short misses, those two like sub 30 misses are what you really stick in your craw a little bit, right? Like, whereas, you know, the consistency from 40 to 49, that's tough. Anyway, moving forward. So another one that I have a pretty strong confidence level in is Alontae Taylor in the slot, where he'll be competing with Kool-Aid McKinstry. I have Alontae Taylor at about 75% confidence rate. And honestly, for a lot of the same reasons that I feel confident that you're going to go back with Blake, is I think this coaching staff is looking at Alontae and saying, yes, there were struggles. There were struggle points last year, but that's where you improve. right? Like you have to give someone an opportunity to improve before you can say, well, they can't do it. And so like, I think you're going to watch Kool-Aid go out there and you're going to give him a chance. But I think this quote from Dennis Allen kind of tells you where everything is from that perspective.
So it's vitally important. I look at the nickel corner as a starter. We probably play 70% of our snaps are in some sort of sub defense. And so I look at that guy as a starter. I would say there was a lot of encouraging things with Alontae Taylor in there last year, and yet there were some things that, weren't as good as they needed to be. And so let's don't forget that Alontae Taylor is a second-year player. It's his first year to play inside in the slot, so like there's some learning that goes along with that. I think he'll be much better and much further along. He's getting that work now in the spring as opposed to the limited work that he got in training camp last year. So I think we're further along in terms of the coaching staff of where we feel like we can, fill the roster out in those particular spots.
Yeah, and so that's pretty much what DA is saying there. It's like, you're going to work on that stuff. Now you're talking about a guy who was benched in 2 of his last 3 games. Like there were issues and there are things that you got to fix, but they're going to give him the opportunity to fix those things. And I think when you look at it, it's kind of similar to Blake in the sense that I think unless Alontae shows up and really falls flat on his face, he's going to be the guy going into the season with that job. Now he could play his way out of it and Kool-Aid can play his way into it, and we'll see how that goes. But I think the most likely scenario is you really want to get Alontae on the field this year in whatever way you can. And you're going to feel really comfortable with Kool-Aid being kind of your backup outside corner the way that Ike Adam was last year, and you're going to go from there. Because I just think that when you're kind of in the swing of things, that's where you want to get, like you want to have your 3 veteran cornerbacks on the field if you can get them on the field. And we'll see how that goes. But again, I think there were high points for Alontae. It's going to be on him to make sure that there's more of those this year than the negatives.
From that DA clip, for me, I still, sounds like a ton of confidence they have in Alontae. Like you brought up, DA mentions the fact year 1 as the slot corner. It didn't go as great as they wanted, but he's going into this year with more of an idea of what to expect, what he needs to do, getting that work initially right off the get from it. We'll see how it goes. Maybe he is a guy that's more suited for the outside, but going into camp, this is your slot guy, and Kool-Aid's kind of like you said, the backup at this point. It'll be interesting to see, I guess, how you can utilize all of these cornerback talents on the field at one time if they can.
Yeah, I mean, maybe he'll work in a dime role. Maybe you give him some safety work. Right. I am going to say, what are we going to do without the planes? Do you think maybe UC Irvine is under is near an airport where we can get the planes flying over? We can request that, because I don't know if it'll feel like a Saints training camp without every third audio clipping. Anyway.
Yeah, if only there was a media room at Airline Drive that they could use.
Drives me nuts that they don't use it. That's got to be a Sean Payton thing. This is an aside, but I'm pretty sure Sean would used to do that to defeat the will of the reporters.
Yeah, he mentioned that totally. It's like, I don't want you guys getting comfortable because that just means asking me more questions.
Yeah. And if you notice the really long interviews, the really long press conferences, like whenever you see Mickey Loomis or Dennis Allen talking for an hour, it's always inside never right. Outside, especially after those long practices. Anyway, I just think that's funny. But, just to close off that point, one thing that I think you're going to give Alontae the benefit of the doubt too is last year at this time, we were talking about who's going to be the starting outside corner. It's going to be an open competition between Paulson Adebo and Alontae Taylor. That was his primary focus. Now, he worked at the slot in second and third team reps, but Bradley Roby was the starting slot corner. He was the first team slot corner. So you never got this time last year to really define what that role was going to be for him. And when do you get better? This is the prime part of your schedule where you can improve as a player and pick up on things and work on stuff that you are deficient at. You don't really have a ton of time to do that during the season because you're busy getting ready for the next opponent or recovering or doing whatever. This is the time where you just get practice against a full team, right? Against an actual offense. And it's also going to be an offense that does a lot of the things that he struggled with last year. So he'll get time to work against it. So I like Alontae Taylor. I think you're going to see him on the field, and I think you're going to just look for ways to get Kool-Aid involved. And again, we haven't even seen Kool-Aid play yet. So we'll find out. I think you're going to get Kool-Aid. One thing we're not going to talk about is the kick returner competition.
Right. Yeah.
I just don't know if it's a competition per se. Like, I don't think you can call it a competition. It's just going to be, okay, who's the best in that role next to Rashid Shaheed? And I have a feeling it's going to be Kool-Aid, because you're going to be looking for reasons to get him on the field anyway. And also coverage units, that's going to be big for Kool-Aid. So we'll see. But he'll get himself on the field.
No, I was just going to say, yeah, overall for me, Alontae is one of those dudes that I definitely have the arrow up going into this season. We still haven't seen the best out of him, and definitely looking forward to him getting more acclimated to his role and showing what he can do, because I definitely believe in the guy's talent. And I don't know, just the Saints corner room is so chock full of talent. I'm just curious on how it's all going to shake out, honestly.
Yeah, and the other thing we can mention, if there was going to be a trade, it would have happened by now.
Right.
Like, you're not going to, if you were trying to trade Marshawn, which there's been no indication that they have been, but if they were kind of secretly back channeling to try to get a trade through, you would want it to be done prior to camp, because you're not going to want him to go out in the field and get hurt if that was your goal. So I think that we can kind of put a pin in that, assuming that all goes to plan and no one is freaking out about roles and stuff throughout camp and holding out or doing something weird like CJ did. And we'll find out with Alvin. But anyway, one last position battle we'll talk about in the first segment. And it's another one that has kind of a strong incumbent player going up against a newcomer. And I think that's why you feel pretty confident that one guy's going to win the job. And it's Pete Werner versus Willie Gay for that starting Will linebacker spot. Keep in mind, this is not a zero-sum game of like either you play Pete or you play Willie. Like, I think that you brought Willie Gay in to play. And I think you're going to find more creative ways. When I talked to Joe Woods about this, he kind of his eyes lit up about like, yeah, you can be a lot more versatile with your looks with Willie Gay than you probably were able to ever with Zach Bond. Caden Ellis might have been a different story. But, if you look at the stats, Willie, he played about 46% of his snaps in coverage last year for the Chiefs. For Zach Bond, it was like 18%. So you really were avoiding that with Zach. Whereas I think that can be a part of your game plan, especially if you go up against teams that like to run heavier looks. A lot of these teams with 2 tight end sets where you can maybe get 3 linebackers on the field. And in the past, the Saints might have just deferred to the nickel. They were in nickel like 81% of the time last year. And I still think you're going to be in nickel a lot, but I don't think you want to be in nickel 81% of the time. Like, you were in nickel that much because you didn't trust your Sam linebacker to cover at all. Because anytime you put him on the field in that scenario, he's going to get eaten alive. That's why you're in nickel 81% of the time. It's also because you're going up against teams who have 3 wide receivers on the field a vast majority of the time. So we'll find out. That said, Pete's going to be pushed for that job. Like, he's going to have to show up. And I'm hopeful that kind of that fire being lit under him means something to him. Right? Because we just have never seen him get back to that early 2022 form where he looked like he was going to be all pro, right? You were talking 10 tackles a game over that first month of the season. He had 40 tackles, 32 solo tackles. He was just making impact everywhere. Now it's just, I don't know. This last season, it kind of felt like he felt like he was playing hurt the whole time. And I don't know if he was, but that was the type of impact you had. So we'll see.
Yeah, that's the big question. You don't know, because there was that much of a regression last year with Werner that it just didn't compute at all. It didn't make sense. Looking forward to seeing what Willie Gay brings, and I could definitely see this being a spot where the new guy ends up taking over the veteran at the spot.
We'll find out. I mean, I think again, it's going to be one of those situations where if Pete Werner stumbles, you open the door. Right now, it's like I don't think they're starting at an even. Like Pete's like right halfway down the track. And in order for Willie to catch him, in my opinion, it would have to be something along Pete's end that goes wrong, But one thing that I think you're going to see Willie rush the passer. I think you're going to see Willie do a lot of interesting things. And we'll find out. But here's a clip from Willie in camp, kind of being asked about his role. And I also asked him about kind of showing up, because one thing that Willie brings is a couple Super Bowl rings. right? This guy's been in the league 4 years. He's been in the AFC Championship or further every single year. So there's got to be some level of like, when you walk into another room, another team, another roster, another locker room, and it's like, well, that's not how we did it. There has to be that level of like, okay, this team wins every year, so they must be doing something right. So I asked him along those lines. So here's that clip.
Be a role player, but I want to make plays. I will say that I don't want to just be a every now and then type of guy, if I got to be honest. But I know that's all on me. The work that I put in will put me in that position. And if I don't, then I'll be just that role player. So. Me personally, my personal goals, which I don't worry about much, but you also know deep down inside, like, hey, you want to be out there on the field, so hey, you know what you got to do.
I talked to Colin last year about coming here from Kansas City, talking about kind of Andy Reid. He's kind of a quirky guy in terms of some of the stuff he did, but it was the consistency of how he did it that, you kind of build on that every day. Is that something when you change organizations, you have to adjust? Are there any examples of stuff that you kind of encountered here that were a little different?
I mean, it is, but I mean, I'm not going to speak on it. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's in a negative way, but like you say, I just try to adjust and try to do it the way that I'm asked and do it the way that the team acts, and hopefully it works, Like I said, I've been with Kansas City 4 years, nothing less than the AFC Championship, so like, I don't want to come over here and be like, hey, that's wrong. I'm trying to learn a different way. It's always new ways to learn and new ways to take stuff in, and like I say, I'm trying to learn the Saints way now, and hopefully that gets us over the hump of that playoff run, man, and we go from there.
It's a diplomatic answer.
Yes.
The interesting thing is, like, there is heavy influence from that Chiefs team because there's Tyrann Mathieu, Colin Saunders, Willie Gay, and even Tano Passanio, who obviously is hurt now, but he was a former Chief. Ugo Amadi also spent time with the Chiefs. So you should feel like, hey, there is a decent amount of influence from that title team, and I think that's not a bad way to try to build out a roster, is to take some pieces from a team that seems to be in the Super Bowl every year. But like, one thing that Willie made clear when he signed this contract is it's not necessarily just to be a backup. Like, that's not what he's here to do. He's here to get on the field. He's here to play, and so we'll see how that looks. Because they clearly sold him on something, and the athleticism is pretty plain to see when you're out there watching at practice. And I'm looking forward to how they deploy him. Like, again, I think you're going to get more creative with that whole situation this year than you did in the past, and we'll see.
No, and I know it's been talked about as well, of being that spy for those mobile QBs that the Saints have had so much trouble for. So definitely welcome a linebacker with some speed to that mix for sure.
Yeah, and the defense played the last 2 years. You've seen this defense struggle to get to the passer with its typical like 4-down, 4-3 defensive end look, and you've seen them kind of go into sub packages later in the year due to injuries, and the defense has been better. It has been a unit that found ways to pressure quarterbacks more efficiently with that kind of hybrid pass rusher on the field. So maybe that's something Willie Gay can do. Maybe that's something you can go to earlier in the year. The question is, and we're going to get into this more, it's like, okay, well, if you're putting him on the field in pass rush situation, what are you doing with all these defensive ends? Because you got a lot of them. But we'll get into that a bit more. But you got anything else on any of those before we move on to the next segment?
No, that one I could see being a little bit more of a competition even. I'm curious to see how Werner responds to all this. But like you said, Willie Gay ain't coming here to be a backup.
Yeah, I have it at 70% for Pete. But, that's 30% for Willie.
I'm kind of maybe in a little bit more, but not I'm in that like 35-40 range for Willie. But yeah, like I'm just nitpicking now.
Yeah. I mean, well, here the thing for me, it's like, this is a contract year for Pete.
Yes.
So if you pull that trigger to make him the backup, then you're basically saying like, okay, we're moving on. You're not even giving him the opportunity to earn that next contract. And that's a tough look. I don't think a team wants to do that with the second round pick, right? So they're going to give him opportunities. Like, again, if it's close, I think you go with Pete, right? Like, I think Willie would have to outplay him significantly to win that job. And it could happen. It could certainly happen. But again, like hopefully it just lights a fire under him.
No, and what's interesting too, we obviously know the big Ohio State connections always talked about. Now we have a Kansas City Chiefs connection going on, which is pretty interesting. And welcome all those Super Bowl rings to the locker room for sure.
Yep. That's a lot. There's a lot of Super Bowl rings in that locker room, considering there's not a lot of playoff experience in that locker room. You know, like it's strange to see a locker room with that many Super Bowl rings and not a ton of playoff experience in general, because all the Super Bowl rings came from somewhere else.
Sadly, right?
Because there's not a single member of this locker room that was with the Saints for that 2010 Super Bowl, which obviously that's not really saying that much because it's a long time ago.
I think the only one still around is Morstead, huh? Yeah. Everybody else is done.
Yeah, I mean, Breeze was the other player for a long time. And there was another guy who hung around for a while. Jari Evans was around for a while. Obviously, he's out of the league. Yeah, I guess you could say he's yeah. So if you consider that in the locker room, you got it.
There you go.
Let's wrap up that segment. We're going to come back. We're going to talk about some position battles that are a little bit closer, but not necessarily right there, but a little bit closer, in my opinion. We're going to dive into a couple on defense and a couple on offense. We got an even split down the middle. It's just what you like to see. But all right, inside black and gold, Jeff Nowak, Steve Geller will be coming right back after these ads. And we're back on Inside Black and Gold, recapping, updating position battles heading into training camp. First practice coming up on Wednesday of next week. So we are about a week away from the start of camp. And for me personally, I always view the first day of training camp as the first day of the season because there's really no break. It's just kind of all go from there. I'm flying out.
Full on, right? After that, like you said, it's like day one of camp. We are in NFL mode.
Yeah, especially this year because it's like, I'm flying out on Monday and then there's like 4 days off the entire camp sequence, right? And that includes travel. So we're going to be all go. But we're updating position battles. We went through 4 in the first segment. They are the 4 that I find the least intriguing in terms of I feel like there is an incumbent that is going to win that job unless something weird happens. So that's Lou Hedley versus Matthew Hayball, Blake Grupe versus Charlie Smith. That's the punter and the kicker. At the slot, you have Alontae Taylor versus Kool-Aid McKinstry. At the will linebacker spot, Pete Werner versus Willie Gay. Pete Werner versus Willie Gay. Moving into this segment, we are going to stick on the defense, but we're going to talk about safety. And to me, there's a position battle between Jonathan Abram, Jordan Howden. It's strange because Jonathan Abram got significantly fewer snaps last year than Jordan Howden. But to me, this defense played its best when you had Jonathan Abram at strong safety and Jordan Howden at the dime spot with Tyrann Mathieu kind of roaming. And you look at the games where you had that significantly. One was New England, the shutout up at Foxborough. Another was Week 17 against the Bucs. Another was Week 18 against the Falcons. What I would argue is the Saints' 3 best defensive games. So I don't know. I just feel like you saw something in those games that works, and I think you're going to stick with it. Jordan Howden, to me, is the best tackler of that trio. So you could argue that you want to get him on the field for that tackling. But I did feel like he ended up out of position a little too often last year. I think he was playing a little over his head. You threw him into the fire really early, and I think he handled it reasonably well. But that's no reason to do it again if you don't feel like he's the best option. So we'll see. I have it at about 65% toward Jonathan Abram.
No, this is a great battle to watch out for because, I think – Howden, obviously, his rookie year was going to be a struggle for him getting to find his way. But I really do think he can press Abram for that starting role. I might have it a little bit closer than 65%, but definitely right there with Abram, just a little bit of a slight advantage over him.
Yeah, and I mean, at the end of the day, you want both guys to be able to play that spot and start at that spot. So it's not necessarily like, oh, you're keeping one and cutting the other. Ugo Amadi's also in that mix, but I think he's more your slot corner mix and just kind of guy you can work around. Special teams is going to be a factor for some of these depth guys, but I think when I don't know, like I just think when you're talking about a group that is very strong on the outside and you really need your safeties to be on point, I would err toward the veteran guy. We'll see. Like I really like Jordan Howden. I think he's going to develop into a really strong player. I wouldn't be surprised if you go with Abram early in the year and you end up starting Howden as the season goes on. One way or another, it's going to be a position battle. It's going to be one that's interesting to watch. And I think it's going to be one of those that you might see them both playing at the same time during the preseason.
Yeah, it's one thing when you were talking about there. To me, it's like I think this could go back and forth the entire season. Honestly,
yeah. There's no reason. I mean, last year you had Lonnie Johnson, and I think that's kind of the role that you're moving Abram into is the Lonnie Johnson role. Marcus May was here last year. You really never got the production that you were hoping to get out of Marcus May. It's, you look at, yeah, it's one of those signings that no one ever really talks about, but it was one of the worst signings of the last, we like to give Mickey Loomis a lot of grief, but for some reason, no one ever brings up Marcus May. This is a guy who had a suspension hanging over his head, was coming off a torn Achilles, and you paid him like 3 years, $30 million. You paid him about the same as Tyrann Mathieu, and he just did not deliver. He was not available. He didn't seem to be in the right spot ever. He had a couple nice takeaways, right? But even those were not generated by him. They were kind of right spot, right time kind of takeaways, with the exception being the one against the Bears, where he was getting eaten alive in that game, and then they went at him one too many times, and he got an interception. But so you are replacing the starting spot. Like last year, we went into it saying Marcus May is the starter.
Right.
This year, it's got to be one of these guys, because you really didn't replace Marcus May. Like you didn't bring in any big name free agents at safety. You're hoping that these guys are the ticket, and so one way or the other, I feel okay with it. Like I think people look down on Jonathan Abram. I don't know. I kind of see a guy who's been in the league long enough that he's going to start playing up to his potential a little more.
No, and just interested to see how Howden's growth, that goes. But I thought Abram did a decent job when called upon, because
he was really good in that Week 17 game.
There was really nothing for this team. Like you mentioned, Marcus May, a huge disappointment, and obviously that's why he's not with the team anymore.
Oh, he was atrocious. Like he wasn't like enjoyable to watch or be around either. Like it was just not, like, again, we talk about all these mistakes from the front office. For whatever reason, that one just kind of flew under the radar as one of the, and you signed him to replace Marcus Williams.
Right.
You could say they signed Tyrann Mathieu to replace Marcus Williams, but they, I kind of put, I guess you could say they signed him to replace Malcolm Jenkins, because Tyrann Mathieu plays a little more like Marcus Williams. But either way, Tyrann Mathieu and Marcus May were signed to replace Malcolm Jenkins and Marcus Williams. Other than being named Marcus, he did nothing to remind you of either of those guys. So we'll see. But again,
good luck to Marcus in Miami now.
Yeah. And I don't think they were going to pay Marcus Williams. It wasn't like they chose Marcus May over Marcus Williams, but that you've dropped off a cliff in terms of quality play at that second safety spot when you had Marcus May in there. So we'll see. I think that's an important one. Next up, and these are all kind of in the same range, I have the backup quarterback competition. Jake Haener versus Spencer Rattler. I have it 65% Jake Haener. Now, it's weird because you look at it and you say, this is a Saints team that really just has never erred on the side of let's have our young backup quarterback. And I think that's less common than a lot of people realize. Like unless you're drafting a quarterback in like the second or third round, you're going with a veteran backup, right? Like you look at who the 49ers had as their backup last year. It was Sam Darnold, right?
Yeah.
I might be making that up.
You're correct.
You are not just taking a quarterback in the 3rd round, 4th round and saying, oh, we got a backup now. Like, there is a skill involved in coming in off the bench and going and winning a game in relief. Like, and it's why, like, you have a Tyrod Taylor as the backup in New York, as your top end backup, even with the Paisan guy behind him. Like, he wasn't the backup. He was the 3rd string. And so I think in most cases you would look at it and say, we'd really like a veteran backup. And that's what you saw with Teddy Bridgewater. It's what you saw with Chase Daniel. It's what you saw with Andy Dalton. It's what you saw with Jameis Winston, right? Taysom Hill, even when you were using him in that backup role. So, like, if you go with Jake, I think some of it is going to be based on, I think he has a little bit more experience. He's a little bit more mature. And I feel a little more comfortable if he has to come in mid-game, they can go win us that game. And we saw last year the value of that. If you had a backup who came in and won you a game, they're in the playoffs. And one of those opportunities was a 17-0 lead in the second half. So I don't know. Now, how much do you value 1 year of NFL experience where you didn't take a snap?
Right.
That's the other question. So if you're not going to value that, then it's probably a pick'em, right? And that's really the only thing separating them, other than I feel like Jake has operated the offense a little more calmly. He looks like a guy who could go in there and play, whereas I think if you threw Spencer in year 1, he would struggle. Not to say he couldn't potentially get better and be a starting quarterback over the course of time, but I don't know if he's definitely not the type of rookie you'd want to play as a rookie. So
yeah, besides having the year under his belt with Haener, I think too what we saw during minicamp OTAs, I feel like your ranking here is pretty fair with Haener having a slight edge over Rattler right now. Obviously, things could change coming these training camp practices coming up, but for right now, yeah, I expect Haener to be that number 2 guy. I'm not even considering in the realm of Nate Peterman end up winning this job at all.
I don't even know why Nate's there. It's basically like an assistant coach.
Right. Some experience with Kubiak, I think.
Yeah. And Janoko.
Right.
No, I mean, I tend to agree. And I think all 3 are going to make the roster. And so to me, that's the question. It's like, if you only want to keep 2 quarterbacks, then you probably go with Spencer, because he's a rookie and this is the offensive system that drafted him. And like, he would have to make you feel comfortable that if it came down to it, you could play him and start him this year. I don't think that's the likely scenario. I think you end up keeping 3. And if you keep 3, then Jake would be number 2. So that's where I land. And I don't think the roster question is going to be that significant that you wouldn't be able to keep 3, but we'll find out.
It's a fun one to watch because obviously this could be the future signal caller of the black and gold. Will be one that I know a lot of folks will be keeping a close eye on.
Yeah, I'm not going to go there. I'm not willing to go that far yet. I'd like to find the future backup quarterback of the black and gold before I even consider, hey, maybe they could start a game. Because right now, I think when you're a 5th round pick, being a career backup is a win.
Yeah, absolutely. Agree.
Right. So that's what I want to see. I want to see these guys prove they can be a backup in the NFL. And then if they can do that,
that's fair. Right.
Go from there. Okay. Next up, and this competition is a 3-way competition. It's wide receiver 3. And so I'm looking at A.T. Perry, Cedric Wilson, Equinemius St. Brown. And you could argue that like they're competing for wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5. How many wide receivers are you keeping? Is an interesting question. Bub Means, I don't really have in that conversation yet. I think you keep him on the roster, but I don't think he's really in a conversation to have a significant role as a rookie. But we'll see. Either way, I put Cedric Wilson in the lead here at about 60%. I didn't handicap the other 2, but I just don't. I think that Cedric, from a run blocking perspective, from the perspective of he's been in that Miami offense that is going to be very similar to the Saints offense. He can play in the slot. He can play out wide. You can move him around. He's bigger. He's bigger than you think. He's 6'2", 195. Like, he's a physical guy. So I think he's the most likely to be in that spot. Plus, Equinemius has already pissed off Saints fans because he's hanging out with his brother talking shit.
Yeah, saying with Equinemius too, I don't know. He's obviously the lesser talented brother.
Oh, yeah. It's got to be a weird Thanksgiving dinner.
Sure, right.
Like, yeah, you're both NFL wide receivers, but one is like really, really good. And the other one's like Jason Kelce and Travis Kelce, they played different positions. They were both elite at those positions.
Exactly.
And then there's Clay Matthews, Casey Matthews. They probably, one is much better than the other. They both played linebacker. Either way, I don't know, but I think they're kind of redundant in that way. Like, I don't think you keep Cedric and Equanimous. I think you keep A.T. Perry over one of those two guys. If you
for sure agreed.
But I also just don't think that you want to have a wide receiver trio. If you're running out in 11 personnel and you have a tight end, a running back, and 3 wide receivers, you necessarily want to have 3 young wide receivers. I want to have a veteran wide receiver in that group. And so that's why I would lean towards Cedric. It's not saying A.T. Perry is not going to get on the field. It's not saying that he can't develop into a very good player. It's right now, based on what the Saints need, I need that kind of, truck that can go over the middle of the field and catch a ball in traffic.
And I love what you said. Obviously, being in that Miami Dolphins system kind of has a little bit of a feel of what the Saints are heading towards.
Yeah. And that's why he's brought in the first place. Like, that's why he's here. He's also been a pretty popular target in camp. Like, he's had the ball thrown to him a good number of times. He is wearing that cursed 11. So maybe that works against him. Maybe he changes his number, because I just don't think, like Deontay wore 11 and it just seemed like he was always getting hurt. Tommy Lee Lewis obviously wore 11, and that's the number that like referees like go blind to. So anyway, that's what I got there.
Yeah, maybe, who knows if he gets a number swap going on during camp.
We'll see. But all right, one more in this segment, and that's going to be your kind of starting 3 technique. Now, it's really, there's only 5 people at this position. So you could tell me that, like, okay, defensive tackle, you want 4 of them, and you're going to have a competition to see who between Kendall Vickers, Jack Heflin, Christian Boyd. I just don't know if you're going to keep 4. I think you'd possibly keep 3. And so the question is, who do you start at the 3 technique next to Colin Saunders on rundowns? Is it Brian Brzee? Is it Nathan Shepard? Last year, it was Nathan Shepard, and the splits kind of bear that out. Brian Brzee was only he was in run defense 148 times, 148 snaps, pass rush 386. Nathan Shepard, he was in run defense 303 times, pass rush 286. Now, here's the thing. Pro Football Focus graded Nathan Shepard at a 30.3 on run defense. They graded Brian Brzee at a 30.1. So your rundowns defensive tackle wasn't playing the run well. So if that's the case, should he even be playing the run? So I wouldn't be surprised if you try to turn Brian Brzee into more of a 3-down defensive tackle this year, but he's going to have to improve against the run. Like, he also graded out at a 30 against the run. He's got to get his pad level better. He's got to be more physical at the point of attack so he doesn't get blown off the line. And it's tough because he's a taller guy. He's got long legs, and low man wins. That's one of the things you look at and you're like, does he profile as a 3-down defensive tackle with that kind of build? And so he's going to have to improve that. He's going to have to get lower, get his pad level down, and kind of tunnel in those situations in ways that he wasn't able to last year. Now, I do think that as a pass rusher, is a ton of upside, and he's going to continue to be that pass rush defensive tackle. In the 3rd and mediums, 3rd and long downs, you're going to get him on there, and that's what the splits show. He also had a decent number of snaps on the edges, right? I think it was 78 snaps at end, one of either right end or left end, when you kind of went with a heavy look, or you stunted and he ended up rushing on the outside. I think that's probably the majority of when you would line it up and he would end up as an end, is Tano Passanio would come in and he would loop around. But one way or the other, I think that's going to be something, because I want to see the 1st round pick from last year take a step forward. And that would be the obvious step forward, is being on the field in more of those rundowns and being successful. So we'll see. I think they're going to be competing for that spot.
No, you put it on the sheet here that I have with the run defense, so key. You kind of miss a guy like David Onyemata, obviously, in this scenario, but curious to see what happens between Brzee and Shepard. We knew coming in that Brzee was obviously a project in the run game. His pass rushing ability was way more advanced. Can he take that next step year 2? I'm hoping that's the case. but I'd kind of bank on Shepard being that guy at least to start off.
Yeah, I have Shepard at about 60% confidence in terms of him taking that, just because he's the veteran. But I need to see him improve. I don't know if I think you saw him play better later in the year.
Yeah,
I think you saw that defensive line in general played better later in the year, especially against the run. So we'll see. Like the games that stick out, the first half against Houston. I know Devin Singletary and Dameon Pierce went off for 100 yards, I think. First half against the Colts, Zach Moss and Jonathan Taylor.
Yeah, you mentioned Dameon Pierce too. I don't think he went off against anybody last year.
No, and you saw they got better as the games went on, right? Like you didn't see running backs really gash the Saints in the second half of games. It was typically in the first half, and I don't know what that is. I don't know why. Maybe it's a scheme thing, but I do want to see. Like I think there is talent with Nathan Shepard. I think that he has skill, and you just need to see him improve there. So we'll find out. Now, I also would like to see Brian Brzee get more opportunities. So I think that's going to be one in the preseason that you actually see them get work in games, and you take something from that.
Yeah, the offensive line, defensive tackle spot, that's going to be the two key battles that we're talking about a ton during camp.
No question. But all right, let's wrap up that segment. We're going to have one more coming back, 4 more position battles getting ready for training camp. These are the ones that are right there, and I couldn't tell you high or low based on what we've seen thus far. So only one that I would put at a pick'em, and we'll talk about that. But this is Inside Black and Gold. I'm Jeff Nowak. He's Steve Geller. You can follow me on Twitter at Jeff_Nowak. You can follow Steve at Steve Geller WWL. Subscribe. Have you subscribed yet? Do that. Otherwise, we'll be right back. And we're back on Inside Black and Gold. One more segment to go. 4 more position battles. And the first one is another 3-way, but it is one of those 3 guys is someone I've not seen on the field at all. So we'll figure it out. And that is the tight end 3 spot. I do think you're going to keep a third tight end. The question is, who is it? Now, this gets a lot more complicated if that third tight end ends up having to play, because Juwan Johnson's foot injury lingers, and we just don't know what to expect from Juwan Johnson. So we'll see. But right now, the 3 I have in that mix, UDFA out of Colorado State, Dallin Holker, the second-year pro, Michael Jacobson, who you don't really know a ton about, former basketball player, big guy, skinny, not exactly a blocking phenom. And then the former Patriot and Raider. Patriot? Was he on the Patriots? I think I got that wrong. Bear? I think he might have been a Bear.
I'd have to look. I don't know offhand.
It's Jesper Horsted, one way or the other. I know he was with the Raiders, and he was a teammate of Foster Moreau and Derek Carr. He went to Princeton. He was a wide receiver. He converted from wide receiver. He was with the Bears from 2019 to 2021, the Raiders 2022 and 2023. He signed with the Saints after OTA. So we did not see him on the field at all. But of these 3 guys, he's the only one who's ever caught a pass in an NFL game. So we'll have to see. I'm not sure what to expect, but right now I have Dallin Holker at about a 55% lead in terms of, I don't think any of these guys has really put themselves ahead. Dallin probably has made the most impact plays, but Dennis Allen kind of talked about this, and until you put these guys in pads and you see them kind of go out there and block and compete, you just don't know. Tight end is a tough position to gauge when you're not in pads. It really is. Because it's just like, I think Mike Tillier said this, is like, you can be fast, but until you're fast in pads, I don't believe you're fast. You can be strong, but until you're strong in pads, I don't believe you're strong. And we'll see. And so I think at the end of the day, all 3 of these guys can go out and catch passes, but which one of them can block at an NFL level? Because I think that's going to be the difference.
And if the Saints do keep Jacobson, can he help out the Pels roster with some length?
They do need a 5.
Just saying. Oh, he's more of a power forward, I think, though.
Yeah, I think he's like 6'6", 6'8". No, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. It's probably might be like a Larry Nance type, but
yeah, there you go.
Either way, like it's going to be fun to watch, and we'll see, if Dowling can kind of continue and develop and build on what he was able to do. Because I think he did have a really solid set of OTAs, especially toward the end with Juwan not out there. So, and here's the thing. You're going to watch Dowling. You're going to see him. I think he's going to make a couple highlight reel catches because it's what he does. Like, he has really good hands. You saw it in college at Colorado State. Like, there's a highlight reel of Dallin Holker catches that you should watch because it's really good. But again, I don't know if that's going to be what makes the roster for him this year. Now, you could end up keeping him on the practice squad even if you don't keep him around, but he's got to show that he can block. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to get him on the field.
The Cajun Cannon, actually, one of his dark horses, he mentioned Michael Jacobson. But yeah, like you said, this is going to be interesting to see how things shake out at this position because, man, oh man, what happens to at tight end if Juwan's not ready for week 1?
Yeah, and Jacobson was busy as well. Like, he was catching a lot of passes, particularly early on. We didn't see as much of him later, like in the last couple OTA sessions. We did see a ton of him early on, and obviously minicamp. I don't know why I keep forgetting to mention minicamp. Like we saw
together.
Saw a good bit of Michael Jacobson during OTAs. I don't know if we saw a ton of him during minicamp, is what I was trying to say. And so that's when you saw Dowling kind of assert himself a little bit more, and we'll find out. Either way, that's going to be a competition the entirety of camp, and obviously Foster Moreau was in there as well. But I don't know if he's not really in that mix, in my opinion, because his role is secure. Because he's kind of that blocking. I kind of put him as like a tight end, like a Josh Hill type, right? Like you need that guy. So there you go. Now, what you don't have in spades is a move tight end other than Juwan Johnson. And, I went off on this pretty hard on Sports Talk on Friday. And it's like, and I've talked about this on the podcast. It really peels my grapes. What, like the whole tight end investment thing. You look around at the NFL and there's all these incredible tight ends and all the teams that are winning all these games. The last, the AFC Championship, you had Travis Kelce and Mark Andrews. The NFC Championship, you have George Kittle and Sam Laporta. And here we are hoping that a UDFA from 3 years ago who converted from wide receiver can beat out the other UDFAs and Foster Moreau so that you can have a maybe passable tight end group. Like, that's the ceiling is satisfactory. Like, there's no upside. Like, you have not spent, and 2 years ago, the draft was as loaded with tight ends as we have ever seen it. And not only did you not, exhausting. It's exhausting. Like, why does this team not have any developmental tight ends that they've spent a draft pick on?
The 2022 draft was the draft for tight ends too, and unfortunately, they did not go after any.
Right? Why not? You look at the Packers; they drafted 2 of them.
Right.
I mean, gosh. Darnell Washington was there in like the 4th round. Like, come on, man, do something for me here. No, we're gonna make it work. We're gonna find wide receivers who are too big to play wide receiver and make them into a tight end. No, we traded up for Adam Troutman.
Then we'll bring back a fan favorite and pretty much ignore him the entire season.
Oh yeah. Anyway, I'm just so annoyed about it. Like, it makes no sense. And like, I don't need you to draft Brock Bowers. I don't need you to draft a tight end on day 1, even the 2nd round. Fine. You don't want to spend a 2nd round pick on a tight end. Whatever. You will not convince me that a 3rd or a 4th round pick cannot be spent on a tight end at least once every other year.
Definitely seems like an ignored position on the team.
It's an important position. Anyway, I digress. It's just going to be another year of black hole at the tight end where you're just like, hey, maybe you can get some production.
Right.
Maybe. And more likely you get none. And do with that what you will. Anyway, it annoys me. It really does. It bothers me because it's nonsensical. Anyway, moving on. Next position battle. This one's a little bit more nuanced, and that is RB2, and it's Jamal Williams, Kendre Miller. Now, I don't know. I don't know what happened to Jamal last year. I don't know if maybe that hamstring injury slowed him down. I don't know if, maybe his Tamagotchi died and he just couldn't get over it, but He was not the Jamal Williams that you were sold entering the building. He just was not that guy.
No, not at all.
Can he be that guy? I don't know. But he's going to have to be that guy to win this job. He's going to have to be that guy to get meaningful snaps next season. And so we'll find out. If he's not, then I sure hope Kendre Miller can be that guy. Because one of those guys has to be that guy. You know?
And with Kendre, obviously the big thing with him is, year two, the biggest question is, can he stay healthy?
Yeah, well, and we'll see. I don't know if he's going to be ready at the start of camp. We'll find out. And this was the time last year where, hey, we're looking at a guy who is dealing with a knee injury, dealing with an ankle injury. He wasn't ready for the start of last season. Like, he missed a good chunk of that developmental time. He was there for OTAs. He was there for minicamp. We'll see how it goes. But yeah, I need him to be there. I need him to be available. And again, I've said this, when he was available last year, he was pretty good. I think, there are some guys who you watch him practice and they don't necessarily flash. And then you get them on the field and that's where they're gamers, right? I think A.T. Perry is one of those guys. You get him on the field and he just makes plays and you're like, oh, that's that guy. I don't remember. And I think that's what Kendre is, kind of one of those guys. When he was on the field last year, he was explosive, particularly in that Week 18 game. He had a couple big plays. I know he had a long catch and run against the Patriots. He had a long catch and run against the Bears. The play got hurt on. Just didn't get a ton of opportunities, generally speaking. So we'll find out. But I think for him, the preseason is going to be really important. And I have Jamal Williams ahead at 55% just because he's the veteran and he's going to get the first crack at it, in my opinion. And this
he had a 17 touchdown season, for crying out loud. Where's that guy? No, not here.
I don't know. But I think you give Jamal the first crack at it. And I think this is probably one that extends into the season. Like, all three of these guys I expect to be on the roster. And I don't know if, I think Jamal, there's a certain level of things he can do in training camp. But at the end of the day, it's going to come down to, when the games start, are you producing? And I don't think the leash for him is going to be very long at all. Because if you get into week 2 or 3 and he's just not getting the job done, you got to be willing to cut bait. I get it. He's a veteran. He's a team leader, whatever. You can't just continue to bang your head against the wall. But again, Kendre's got to prove that he's the guy you should be giving those carries to. So I think that both of these two guys are. It's interesting because it's a position battle, but they're both kind of just battling themselves. I don't know if they're competing with each other more so as they're competing with their own issues that they need to fix.
Right, their own shortcomings. And we talk about the offensive line being a big issue for this team. I don't know if it's really going to help the run game that much this season. We'll have to wait and see if these 3 young new pieces along the O-line can help open things up, I guess.
That's a good point. It is a new scheme. And so, does Jamal really fit in a kind of a wide zone scheme? I'm not sure.
Right.
I'm not sure. So we'll find out. But I think Kendre should be able to, one way or the other. Let's move forward. We got 2 left. One is left guard. I got Nick Saldiveri versus Shane Lemieux. I got Saldiveri at about 55%. And that's mainly just because he's gotten the first team reps.
I was going to say, we haven't seen much of Lemieux at all.
No. Well, we have, but he's been in the second team reps, right?
Right.
So we haven't seen them rotate. And that's where you can, when you talk about a real position battle, that's typically what you'll see is one day, like we talk about Spencer Rattler and Jake Haener, right? They've been rotating first and second team reps. Last year, Paulson Adebo, Alontae Taylor, they were rotating first and second team reps. When it's a legitimate position battle, that is what you do. Right now, we have not seen that yet. I would be surprised if we get all the way through camp and we do not see at least some level of rotation with those first team reps, because I just think if a veteran is there and playing at a high level, you're going to err toward a veteran, knowing all of the question marks you have in terms of a rookie left tackle, a rookie right tackle. Do you really want a question mark at left guard? I've said this a million times and I believe it. I think you're going to get toward the end and you're going to be like, you know what? Let's go with Shane Lemieux. But again, it's on Nick to win that job. And right now he hasn't done anything to lose it. So That's a good start for him. And I do think that the athleticism plays in his favor. He's a little bit more athletic than some of these older guys. And this offensive line scheme is going to prioritize athleticism. And so maybe that helps him hold on to that. But man, if you go into next season with Trevor Penning, Nick Saldiveri, and Taliese Fuanga, like that is a huge, massive overhaul. And it's very scary when you consider the guy you're blocking for is not going to, make anyone miss, right? I mean, that's not true. He can make somebody miss, but he's not going to outrun anybody out of the backfield. So,
and the scary thing with Lemieux is, too, it's like the guy can't stay on the field either.
Yeah, but I'm okay with that because I think that it's not necessarily hey, we do not trust Nick Saldiveri to play at any point. I think week one is a big ask when you are trying to figure out what exactly do we have in these guys? How do we have to work this so that we can keep Derek alive? So if Shane can't play 17 games, that's fine because I'm comfortable with Nick stepping in at some point. Just not sure if it's going to be week one. And by week 3, when you have a better handle on things and you're like, hey, maybe this is the opportunity to give this guy a chance. I don't know. But one way or the other, I think that is going to be a competition. It doesn't look like one right now, but I do think that as you go, it's going to become more of a competition. And I think there are some other guys who could insert their names into that mix as well. Lucas Patrick can play guard. I think Oli Udoh, he's an interesting guy that I think he's going to factor in on the outside, but he could also factor in on the inside. So we'll find out. Either way, left guard is going to be a position to watch. It's one of the few that on the offensive line that I think you have a legitimate question. Like right tackle, left tackle, there are question marks in terms of what are you going to get out of these guys, but they're not on my position battle list because I don't know who they're competing with.
Right. That those are the guys and can they get the job done or not? That's the only question.
Yeah. Like they could fall flat on their face and it's a nightmare scenario, but I don't think that it's a situation where it's like, oh, well, they lose that job because the guy behind them just played so well. Because that's what it would have to be for a battle to play out. And we'll see. Maybe that is what happens. Maybe Landon Young ends up having such a great training camp that you're like, yeah, he's a right tackle. Now Fuaga, I don't think there's going to be anybody that pushes him off that spot regardless, but we'll find out. Either way, left guard, it's on the list.
One more on the list.
One more. We got one more. We made it. We made it all the way down this list. All right. This is another threefer. Is that a word? Threefer? It's kind of like reefer.
The terrible trio.
Threefer madness. All right. And this is going to be that third defensive end. Man. I think you could look at it and say, okay, we're talking about Cam Jordan's spot. Sure, whatever. It's going to be a rotation. I think Cam is your rundowns defensive end. So in the sense that, hey, he's going to be your starter. You're going to get the first play of the game is always a rundown. So I would pencil him in as the starter. I don't know how many snaps he's going to play. That's a question. And that's when you talk about how many snaps does Cam play, who gets the other snaps? It's probably going to be this guy. It's going to be that third defensive end and probably the one that you bring on the field in more pass situations, right? So the guys I have, Chase Young, Isaiah Foskey, Peyton Turner. I have it as a pick 'em. I think whoever plays the best out of these three guys is going to get on the field the most, and also whoever stays healthy the longest. That's also the big question with these three guys. All three dealt with injuries last year. Chase Young is coming back from that neck injury now. I do think you look at it and you say Chase is probably the most likely pick of, hey, you paid this guy this offseason. He's got all that talent. You're going to want to get him on the field. That said, you're not going to just hand him the reps. He's going to have to earn the reps. Like you signed him to a 1-year prove it deal. That means he has to prove it. You don't have to give him opportunities to prove it. He has to take those opportunities. As a team, if Isaiah Foskey goes out there and balls out, what are you better off doing? Are you better off just shoehorning Chase Young into the lineup because you signed him, or giving the young player opportunities, the guy who you'd like to develop into your long-term defensive end? Because here's the thing. If Chase Young comes out and plays well, he's leaving anyway. He's going and signing somewhere else. So you do not have an incentive to just bury Isaiah Foskey on the depth chart. You don't really have an incentive to bury Peyton Turner on the depth chart. So I think it's going to be a competition between these three guys, and whoever plays the best is going to get out there. Now, the likeliest scenario is that Chase Young plays the best because he's the best player among them. But we'll find out. Either way, I kind of have it. Like I'm not handicapping. I'm not putting Chase Young ahead, if you will, like just because he's Chase Young.
Peyton Turner, I'm very turned off by just because of the disappointments that we've had with him. Foskey, I'm definitely hoping to see some kind of progress in year 2 because I feel like it was almost a waste of a rookie year for him. I know he dealt with some injuries too, but hearing Dennis Allen still saying the guy's got to, get out of his own head, let it rip. What's going on with him is curious because obviously he's got the ability being the all-time sacks leader at Notre Dame. So curious to what is holding him back right now. And then with a guy like Chase Young, the ability's there. Injury issues have been a factor for him. The second overall pick in the draft, you don't go that high. There's been busts before, I guess, that have happened. But with a guy like Young, this elite talent is there. The guy's had issues to staying on the field. Kind of sounds like a la Peyton Turner, but I think Chase Young could be a huge X factor for this pass rush.
I agree. And you're a better team if you get the Chase Young of the peak version of Chase Young. Right? If you're in a situation where Isaiah Foskey is outplaying Chase Young, it's probably because Chase Young isn't playing well. And so, that's not necessarily a positive thing. I haven't seen Chase Young play well. I haven't seen Chase Young play at all. We do not know what we're going to get out of Chase Young. So that's why, like right now, I'm kind of just being cautiously optimistic with it. With Peyton Turner, I don't know. More like Peyton turned down. That was bad.
He's been bad, so he deserves it.
You turned down his 5th-year option, so he's in a contract year. Who's signing that guy? Like
Minnesota.
and that's the frustrating thing too. Is like when he's been on the field, he's kind of like Kendre. He's been productive, right? Like he's made plays. He's just gotten hurt when he's made plays, and I don't know. What do you do with that? I don't even know how you evaluate it. Like you could say like, oh, it was a bust. It was a bad pick. I guess. I don't know who the player even is. Like I genuinely don't know who Peyton Turner is as a player because we have not gotten an opportunity to see it.
No, I don't know who's doing the scouting on these defensive end draft picks, but they've been kind of a whiff, if you ask me.
Well, but like again, I don't know. You're not drafting him based on like, oh, well, he's going to get hurt, so we can't draft. Right.
But Turner was banged up a lot in college too, so I don't know. I got no excuses for him.
That's really not a determinant of like, well, you got hurt in college, you're going to get hurt in the NFL. So it's like, I don't know. What's the scouting? The scouting could have been on point. The scouting could have been perfect, and you just never have seen it. So it's tough to even evaluate. It's tough to even say like, well, I guess you just shouldn't draft Houston guys. Like you should have taken Greg Rousseau because you knew the name. It's just, I don't know. It's tough. Either way, I'd love to see Peyton at least be there. Like
that's a big ask.
Because whether he's the D5 to start the season, guys get hurt. Availability will be there in terms of snap share. You just got to be there too. And that was the frustrating thing for Foskey is later in the year when Cam was dealing with injuries and you did need to reduce his snap share, Isaiah was out. So you didn't get that opportunity that you would have had to be on the field to learn on the job. And instead you're kind of going in flat from where you finished last year. And so we'll find out. Either way, that's my last position battle is DE3. I have it as a pick'em between Chase Young, Isaiah Foskey, and Peyton Turner. And realistically, you could argue to me that there should be a platoon here where, pass rushing downs, you take Carl Granderson and Cam Jordan off the field and you put in 2 of these guys. Or you put in a NASCAR package and one of them shifts inside. Peyton Turner's got the size to shift inside. I just don't know how much, how aggressive are you going to be with that personnel, knowing that it's like just being on the field is a win. So we'll find out. But yeah, that NASCAR package is also going to be a question, but I just don't know how you figure that out until the season gets you.
Yeah, it's just a lot of questions with this spot, and whether it's injuries, lack of experience, the Saints need a better pass rush because last year was just abysmal.
Yeah, 36 sacks, which was 28th in the NFL. I think 118 pressures, which was also 28th in the NFL. Got to be better than that. And the thing is, like, you should be able to cover. So I do think that there is an extent of, like, you go back and watch that Jags game. It's like, you're not sacking Trevor Lawrence because he's saying no. Like, you physically can't get to him within the second and a half that he has the ball to sack him. So, like, Tom Brady was like that too. But that's not the case every week. Like, you've got to be able to generate that, especially in pass rush situations. And I think a lot of it is like, yeah, you get more sacks when you force passing downs, right? Like, you're not getting a sack on 2nd and 3. They're running the ball, or at least you have to protect against the run, in which case they are at an advantage. Like, so to get sacks, like, and this is the part no one talks about, to get that sack total up, you also have to stop the run on first down, because it's a lot more difficult to get sacks when you're allowing 4, 5, 6 yards on first down. So those two things are connected. And I think those, and I think that is when you look at why is the sack number so low? Well, you look at how they did on first down, stopping the run. And in the games where you were able to actually generate some sacks, they stopped the run. That Week 17 game against the Bucs, they stopped the run. They got to Baker Mayfield. In that Week 4 game, they didn't stop the run, and Baker was able to just do whatever the hell he wanted.
That game, that Week 4 was such a head scratcher. I don't know what the heck happened to the team that game.
Adam Prentice fumbled at the goal line. Like, that was last year's season in a nutshell. Ike Adam is a great interception. You're like, wow, our luck has finally turned. And then 2 plays later, the Bucs are scoring a touchdown.
That hurts.
That did hurt. And it was over Ike Adam too. Like, how frustrating must that have been? Like, one of your best highlights is then replaced by, like, well, I guess I got burned here. Trey Palmer.
No, all over last year was definitely frustrating, and hopefully that's not the case this year. And I just want to get back to the playoffs. We've talked about it before. It's like, let's make a run here. I'm not saying black and gold Super Bowl. I'm not a fool, but this team does have talent enough to make the postseason.
You and Amon Ra have something in common. The first play of last season was a fumble turnover. The first play.
Set the tone, baby.
And that guy ended up being all pro. Figure that out.
Right.
All right. Who dat? This is Inside Black and Gold. We have just gone through all 12 position battles that we are kind of handicapping. I'm not going to go through the entire list, but feel free. I'll have the list in the show notes on the podcast and the YouTube description. So if you need to check that out, I'll also post this on WWL.com. So if you want to get more of a write-up, feel free to check that out. I'm Jeff Nowak. He is Steve Geller. You can follow me on Twitter at Jeff_Nowak. You can follow Steve at Steve Geller WWL. You get the latest news, notes, and analysis over at WWL.com. We are a week away from training camp, and we'll actually have something to talk about. We won't have to do any more of these lists, which I know everyone's thrilled about.
People love lists, though.
It is list season, and we have delivered. We gave you the pressure.
I'll take lists over mock drafts any day.
Gave you the grades. Yeah, mock drafts. Oh, man. Oh. Hey, at least you can go in knowing that my mock draft is correct.
Hey, man, you have been pretty on the money. I'll give you that for sure.
That's all I have. At least I'm right about something. Broke clocks, that sort of thing. Blind squirrels, nuts. Blind nuts, yeah. Squirrels. Anyway. Who dat? Go Saints. Be easy, y'all.
Inside Black and Gold forever.
Gross.